What happens if we strip away all the trappings of our spiritual lives? What happens if we remove all the earthly things, all the man-made objects and ideas, all the institutions and external expressions of faith? What happens when it's just you and God? I think musicians have figured this out. The sense of transcendence in the midst of music making, sharing a vibration with the divine. I think athletes have figured this out. The experience of pure flow, actively expressing our sacred nature. I think children have figured this out. The raw existence of play, the divine delight in a childlike curiosity. There are so many people out there who know that God is in the music, in the sport, and in the play. But they keep hoping to find some truer version of God in the building, in the book, and in the pulpit. Today's guest is a mystic, a contemplative, someone who reminds us that God is closer than our own breath. I think you'll really feel something powerful by sitting inside this conversation between me and Keith. And I want you to know that I'm really glad you're here with us, listening in. You are exactly who I hoped would listen. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Between Podcast. This is your host, Matt Mattson, and I'm really excited to introduce today's guest. Keith Kristich is a writer, a retreat leader, a contemplative, a mystic, and the founder of the online contemplative community called Closer Than Breath. His mission is to help people unlearn rigid religion, reimagine what is divine, and see God everywhere. Keith, I'm so glad you're here. I wondered if maybe you could start by demystifying mysticism for us. I mean, I think there are a lot of people, me included, who feel, I don't know, like something inside of us is drawn to mysticism or drawn to mystics. Or maybe we feel, I sometimes feel like a kindred spirit with folks who consider themselves contemplatives, but those words can seem so heady and almost intimidating. And I wondered if maybe you could give us some basics and tell us how you found these practices.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Matt, and honored to be with you. I think that's a great starting question. And I love splitting hairs on words and definitions.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's always somewhat meaningless because the words always elude us. And I think that's one of the sort of founding principles of a contemplative spirituality or mystical spirituality, to recognize the limits of language, to recognize the limits of our beliefs, the limits of our dogmas. If we believe in God, how can we possibly box God in with our words? And so there's this great quote from St. Augustine who says, if you can comprehend it, it is not God. And so on one level, like a mystic knows that it's impossible to box in the divine. But what I want to say to sort of step back is like my own contemplative spiritual journey has been one of slowing. If we look at contemplatives and mystics, those often get thrown around together. And I think of contemplative spirituality fundamentally about slowing in a busy world, slowing because we live in a chaotic and fast-paced society. And what happens when we slow down and we touch our bare naked being, a phrase that mystics throw around a lot. What is being? We're always thinking, feeling, doing, thinking, feeling, doing. Well, what about the beingness, the existence of all that is underneath? And we call that God. We don't share our thoughts, we don't share our feelings, we don't share the same beliefs, but we share the same isness, the same sense of being. And that's God's living reality. And so contemplative spirituality is about slowing down, slowing down in the busy world, stilling in a chaotic world, quieting, in a very, very noisy world, and recognizing that there's something simple within us. And I think of the mystic as just the one that knows that God spirit is alive within us and that we are already one with God. And in many contexts, I grew up evangelical, have gone through my own deconstruction journey the last 15 years. And I know what it's like to think like you are one with God can sound heretical. It sounds like heresy, but I really have come to believe the opposite is true. That it's a heresy to say that you have an independent and separate existence from God, as if God's out there the guy in the sky, and that I'm here and you can't get any closer to me. Like I exist separate from you. But the contemplative or mystical orientation is really about recognizing not the creator God outside of ourselves, but the living reality of God that permeates every aspect of our life from the inside out, from our thoughts and our feelings, our bare naked being, to the world that saturates the physical world around us. Um,
Hmm. So
and
oh, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but there was so much meat to chew on right there, Keith, that I'm gonna be vulnerable early and just ask a real question, just you and me talking real quick. I I have found myself like wanting to, and this is, I suppose, like this is ironic in a way, or it is antithetical to even the idea of what contemplative life is about, or what a mystic is truly about. But I've been finding myself wanting to claim the identity of a mystic, or claim the identity of contemplative, and to say out loud, I think I'm a mystic, but it feels like I need to go to, I don't know, out in the desert for 40 days in order to do that, right? Like, or I've got to have a certain, I don't know, I've got to have gone through a certain ritual, but I just, what I think I hear you saying is that there is this innate being that if we're willing to just honor that and notice how, at the very least, how close that innate being is sitting to God, then maybe that's all there is. Maybe that's what being a mystic is, or it like is sitting there and slowing. Is that what it really is?
I mean, that's why I love the definitions and I hate it. It's
Yeah,
that
yeah,
paradox, right?
yeah,
Because I'm totally with you. It's so beautiful to elevate the mystic, to say
yeah,
like maybe Jesus was a mystic and
yeah,
someday I will put on the mind of Christ.
yeah,
Or Buddha, maybe Buddha was a mystic in some weird sense, and then you want to wake up in an enlightenment or something.
yeah,
But yeah, so I will tend to have the low bar mystical understanding. Like, do I call myself a mystic? I don't know. It's like if and am I an animal? If you eat and
yeah,
poop, you're an animal.
yeah,
If you
yeah,
pray and you meditate, you're a mystic. Like, what if
yeah,
that's the bar? Do you pray? Do you meditate? Do you
yeah,
like have a relationship with the sacred?
yeah,
Then you're a mystic.
yeah,
That's the low bar. And so I think it's okay to embrace that for ourselves. And then there's this element that, like, yeah, there are saints, there are sages, there are teachers
yeah,
across religious traditions that we don't want to elevate so that we can say, like, oh, we'll never be like them. Like, they're so grandiose, we'll never be like them. Like, we don't necessarily want to do that, but they are our teachers. And fundamentally, we don't even want to seek our teachers. In many ways, contemplatives will say, don't seek the teachers, seek what the teachers were seeking.
mm,
And so we
mm,
want to seek the truth. We want to seek love. We don't want to seek some person that embodied love.
yeah.
We want to seek what they were seeking. And so, yeah, if we recognize the nakedness of our being and we're active in a prayer, meditation, or a spiritual journey, okay, call yourself a mystic. I think that's appropriate. And then recognize the world is going to have their own opinion, whether you're a
Yeah,
mystic or not, and who cares what they think.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's a spectrum.
You said early on in your response to that first question that I mean, you were talking a little bit about the limitations of language, right? And this is both one of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to spirituality, and also my obviously least favorite thing to talk about when it comes to spirituality, is the fact that we can't even agree on, when I say one simple three-letter word, God, we can't even agree. I mean, we can't even come close to agreeing what it is that I mean, or that you might mean, or what you might hear, or what you might mean when you say it, right? Like that three letters, we can't come to an agreement on that. And so we've built these massive, ancient, problematic, and complicated and beautiful institutions around the simple truth that we can't quite get our hands around what those three letters mean to us, and how to understand them, and how to use that idea for life, to live life. I wonder how you tackle the limitations of language on a daily basis in the work that you do, in the writing that you do, in the thinking that you do. or in the praying that you do. How do you tackle that challenge of, man, what we can't even figure out what it is that we mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's such an important point, and I think it's something that people that are, especially in the deconstruction journey, recognize that
Mhm.
everybody has a different view, and then it all starts to crumble in some ways. And for me, I have a few baseline fundamentals. Is one that God is ultimate mystery, and so any definition we give is inherently inadequate. And like that's glorious. That's to say that God is so infinite beyond that like nothing will ever be able to box God in. And that makes God really sexy to me. Like whether or
Yeah.
not you know, to jump into the mystery is like really exciting. I want a God that I can like swim in,
Yeah.
that a God that I can like eat and taste and touch and chew,
Yeah.
not like a God to believe in our mind. And it's so easy to think about, yeah, we've been given dogmas and doctrines and belief systems, and we've been saying that's what God is. But just like you can picture an apple in your mind, and the apple in your mind is not an apple, it's just a thought, it's an
Yeah.
image of an apple. We can also put our belief of God in our mind. And we have to be honest that that image of God we have in our mind is not God. It's a belief, it's a thought. And so this is what the wonderful teaching about idolatry is like
Mhm.
all of our images of God are idolatry. If we're not willing to recognize that there's a reality greater than our understanding, then our images of God, our beliefs in God are inherently idolatrous. So
Yeah.
I think the mystery of God sort of has to stay at some sort of foundation level, and that mystery doesn't have to be scary. It is scary for my evangelical upbringing, or for so many people in my work that are, came in through the Catholic Church, and it's like, here's the Catholic Catechism. This you want God, here you go.
Yeah.
And so it's, if you think you have to have the definition and God boxed in, then the mystery is totally frightening.
Yeah.
But if we are grounded in a faith that's deeper than our belief, then the mystery is exciting because it's something that you can participate in and explore instead of just have to like deal with because it's what somebody else told you to believe in.
Yeah. I want to get to, I want you to tell the story of, it sounds like your faith journey has evolved pretty dramatically. And I want to get to that. But before I do, let's be humans together for a moment, Keith. I'm guessing you don't just sit around and contemplate all day. Maybe you do. Maybe your day is just think about God and deconstruct the language of God, and the words will continue to elude us. So let's dive into the mystery. And so that is the whole, and then it's 5 o'clock and you make dinner. Maybe that's what your day is like. But I'm guessing you got other parts of your life. Let's be human together. What keeps you busy, Keith? What's
Yeah, well,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I would be very upfront. Like everything I teach and say is also a message to myself. Like I live
Yeah.
in a busy world. I'm a dad. My boy's about to be be 2 years old. He's
Yeah.
actually sick today. Our babysitter is not here because our boy is sick, and so the day gone. That's a curveball.
Uh-huh.
So just like anybody else, I'm living in the chaos. So even though this is something that I live and breathe as my own work, if we want to call it that,
Yeah.
at the same time, I'm just an ordinary person, drinking beer, eating pizza on the weekends,
Yeah.
playing the guitar, playing the banjo. And so, what I really like to point to is like a not so mystical mysticism or a not
Yeah.
so spiritual spirituality that, like, how can just like changing the diapers of my son be my prayer
Yeah.
rather than it always being about meditation or centering prayer or contemplation? Like, those traditional spiritual practices are certainly invaluable to me, but at the same time, like everyday life just has to have a spiritual undertone to it because God is, being is, all of this is. And so if I can like tune into that reality beneath the reality of the surface level of things,
Yeah.
and everything can become sacred, even a dirty diaper. So yeah, I'm just doing my ordinary life just like anybody else, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
I think I feel like a lesson that it took me a long, long time of adulthood to really learn was that sacred practices, sort of ritual practices, or for me, writing a daily prayer, or centering prayer in that tradition, or I mean, going to mass in a Catholic tradition. You mentioned like these rituals are, for me. It took me so long to learn that I wanted those in my life, so that it could make changing the dirty diaper sacred, so that I could
Mm.
see the sacred in the dirty diaper, or in the moment, in the quiet moment with my daughter, or
Mhm.
in the after dinner, in the 30 minutes after dinner when the kids are watching TV and my wife and I are just sitting at the table and having it, like, so I could see the sacred in that, so I
Mhm.
could feel the holy in the ordinary. And Keith, I actually love that you mentioned that, because I think it's so easy to separate the two, right? Or it's so
Yeah.
easy to compartmentalize. My faith life goes, is down the road and around the corner at my church where I go on Sunday and Wednesday or something
Mhm.
like that. But this part of what between is about for me is about, uh, how can we borrow from those things that happen down the road and around the corner? How can we borrow from those and bring them into our moments of connection, bring them into our moments of being with each other? I love that. I love that you said that. A 2-year-old son, your son is 2 right now.
Just about to be, yeah, yeah.
Man, that is what a wonderful moment in your life.
It's sacred days. He's like a wild monkey roaming through the house. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that's beautiful.
yeah.
That's beautiful. All right, so let's talk about maybe your faith background and the evolution of your faith. Just because I think there's power in hearing people's story of a growing faith. And one thing I've learned is that faith grows in lots of different directions. It doesn't all grow in a particular path. It grows in lots of different directions, and it's informed by a lot of real parts of life. I'm curious about your faith journey up to this point in your life.
Yeah, 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 and thank God it does grow because and in so many like life and death moments, right? Like our
Yeah.
faith journey is not like to say it's a zigzag is like an understatement because
Yeah.
for me it's been a series of like death and resurrections, like multiple
Yeah.
reincarnation, if you will. It's
Yeah.
not just one and done. Like we might think of enlightenment or something. It's like, whew,
Yeah.
there's a lot of dying going on here. And so I grew up in the evangelical church, and at the time it was like a much healthier version than it is now.
Yeah.
And so my God loved me. My God was the Father who gave the Son for my sins, and so that was a healthy expression to recognize that God was a loving being, and I'm grateful for that sort of foundation. But yeah, early in college, everything started to crumble, and um, in a lot of ways, it started with falling in love with the Catholic mystics, which pointed to a God beyond my Christian or my like evangelical worldview.
Yeah.
I would listen to. I don't know. Do you know the band Me Without You?
No, I don't know Me
Oh,
Without You, but I'll.
fantastic.
Okay.
Fantastic band, very mystical in many ways, and right, they're a Christian band, but raised by a Sufi father and a Hasidic mother. So they're raised in this interfaith household, and their music really represents that. And so I would use their music sort of as like prayer because their words are so potent and so powerful, but
Yeah.
from various religious expressions. And after I put on these three songs, the final song was called Allah, Allah, Allah.
Mhm.
And so once the words went silence, I just fell into this like into the well of silence is like the best I can explain it.
Mhm.
And there I was experiencing meditation or contemplation, and I had no words to understand what that really was. And in my little evangelical mind, like meditation equal Buddhism.
Yeah.
That's like all I knew. And so I explored Buddhism by book in my evangelical college in my dorm room, So I was
Yep.
like, okay, I think I'm meditating. How does this work? What's Buddhism really? And that was really helpful until I was invited to a Franciscan friary, Mount Irenaeus in New York State. And that was a really powerful retreat center that talked about contemplative prayer, union with God, contemplation from the pulpit. So from their weekly Sunday mass, they
Yeah.
would teach the method of centering prayer, which is the meditation method I teach now. And so they would teach centering prayer from the Catholic pulpit.
Yeah.
It is a retreat center, this beautiful space.
Yeah.
And so there I was able to like kind of that was one restructuring of consciousness or restructuring of my faith because it was crumbling and leading to atheism in my evangelical worldview, and then that mystical or contemplative experience in meditation was an experience. So
Yeah.
like the mental stuff was breaking down in my dorm room and was like, I don't even believe in God. And then I was having this intense experience in silence that I didn't know how to make sense of, exploring Buddhism. and then finally like getting some quality teaching again, the mental stuff in some ways from this retreat center. And so that was a restructuring to recognize like there's this contemplative tradition in the church that so many people have missed or we haven't been told about. That we don't have to go study yoga or Hinduism to like explore meditation practices, but we can explore them in our own faith tradition. And the language is a lot looser than at least the evangelicals like to make it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating, actually. And for me, it feels like a missed, I don't know, missed growth opportunity for Christianity in America. Uh, how is it that I now know that this is true, but for most of my life, including most of my adult life, I certainly didn't know that there was anything close to a contemplative tradition in like in nearly every stream of Christianity or like that lives around me, but it didn't show up in churches that I showed up in. It didn't show up in conversations or in books or in mainline, or in, I should say, in popular culture iterations of what Christianity looked like. But there's this deep, deep long, I mean, ancient tradition of everything that people are looking for from yoga and everything people are looking for from Buddhist meditation. You and I did the same thing, right? And in college, we found some Buddhist books and started like, man, I had that whole, and it was, and I still claim some like mild Buddhist identity because of that. There's something there that there was a language there that spoke to me that I had never heard before anywhere else in my life. And it was so empowering. It was so it 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 like opened this door in my body that said there is a soul in there that you just have been nobody's told you about before. Nobody let you even look at before. I love that you had a similar experience. So what now? What's the thing now that is what's the impetus for growth today? What's the thing you're excited about right now? That's one of the reasons I love talking about spirituality is because there's like infinite topics or angles or perspectives. I'm curious, what's tickling your soul right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, on one level, it's always like, well, like bringing exactly what you're saying out to the masses in a sense, because, and like something like your podcast does is sharing a message with the world is that, yeah, people don't know about this. And so that's certainly tickling me to recognize that, there's this like treasure house, like
Mm,
that nobody knows about. It's like literally like there's treasure over there. Let's go.
yeah.
And so that's exciting. And then the other thing more personally, I mean, so that's like sort of collective, right? I think more personally, just exploring more the physicality of this, like understanding this union with God. Like I experience it on this like metaphysical level of like thinking, feeling, doing. What is my naked being inside of the silence and stillness of contemplation or meditation? And so that's been something that's been very close to home for 15 years. And yet I'm also playing with like physically, what does it mean to be one? To not just live. Thomas Merton said some people live for God, some people live with God, some people live in God,
Mhm.
and we might add some people live as God.
Yeah.
And to recognize that like we are an extension of God, like we are an extension of the body of Christ, like physically. And I think of it in like the universe, like we are one with the universe. Like it's easy to think the universe is out there, like the universe is the
Yeah.
stars and the planets and the cosmos. But it's like actually the plant behind me is the universe,
Yeah.
and the food in my fridge is the universe, and actually the food in my belly is the universe unfolding in real time. Like you, Matt, are the universe
Yeah.
right here and right
Yeah.
now, and physically one with reality, physically one with the universe, physically one with the unfolding of God's being in the world. And so that's something I'm playing with, especially like with my son being here, a living, like
Mm,
he is the universe unfolding in real time before me, and an expression of God's body here and now. And that adds a sort of sacred mystical quality to it, but it's also totally mundane. It's totally like it's just my son's body.
yeah.
It's
Just
just a
a
bottle of milk in the
yeah.
fridge. It's like
Yeah.
nothing special or mystical about it, and yet do we have eyes that see, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You something about what you just said made me it made my head go in a direction that I'm not sure you were saying this, but this is where my head went. I feel like a lot of people might think of somebody who lives a contemplative life or somebody who might be something close to a mystic as every practice is about bringing peace to your life, is about bringing calm to your life. I think there's maybe an assumption that that's it. But I sense that that's not true. I sense that contemplation may stir you, may make you uncomfortable, may poke you in ways like being that close. I think maybe when you talked about, uh, recognizing your naked being underneath all of, man, that's a scary thing, Keith. Like for me, I get almost this weird sense of fear at either A, I don't know my naked being that is there, or B, if I do encounter my naked being, can I understand it? Is it, or is it scarred? Or, right? Like, I just feel like there is to choose to contemplate fully and to choose to really go beneath the surface of our typical understandings of spirituality might be a little scary or might invite discomfort. Am I off base there?
No, I think that's very much, I mean, on point. I think we're cutting through the layers of BS that we've been given.
Mm.
And that's given to us by society and our pursuit of happiness or
Yeah.
health or wealth. It's been, the BS we've been given by the church or religions, the BS we've been given by our parents, our wonderful parents, maybe.
Yeah.
Like it's cutting through so many layers of the ego, of the false self system. So
Yeah.
in the centering prayer world, our Thomas Keating, who was a Trappist monk, and he would teach that the false self or ego, those are subtly different, but the false self is a system. It's not just like a psychological point in our brain, but it's a full system. And the aim of the contemplative life is dismantling the false self.
Ooh,
And boy, that is not fun to do. It ain't
no,
fun to like wake up. When you get woken up in the morning, it's not fun to be like woken up in
no.
and so I think there is something there to say that we have our assumptions that the contemplative life or meditation practice is about calming, like you said, or about going to that place of peace, where sometimes the very opposite happens. Like we let go of the busyness of the mind, and centering prayer in particular, we are always letting go. It's a via negativa, negative letting go practice. And so what happens when we let go of thoughts, feelings, and emotions? Sometimes old trauma comes up. So you're
Yeah.
sitting there in meditation, and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be feeling peace, like union with God. That sounds nice. And then you're letting go, letting go, letting go, and the conscious mind quiets and the unconscious opens up. And what's in there? Old memories, old
Yeah.
trauma. And so, but that's all stuff we need to let go of. So that's part of the healing process of our meditation practices. And it's part of the barrier between us and the nakedness of our being.
Yeah.
But I do believe once we touch base with that nakedness of being, that's an alertness, it's an aliveness. So, like the calmness we're seeking in meditation or prayer is like, yeah, there's an element there for like the spiritual ego to go find its peace. But once we get to that nakedness, I think there's energy there. That's why, like, Jesus is well known. He didn't ever write a book, but
So
he was
good.
in tune with something deep within him.
Yeah.
And so he didn't write a book to be known. He just lived his life. And so he has this force and this influence over the world because he was in touch with that.
Mhm.
I and the Father are one.
Mhm. I think I want to ask you a really practical question. Um, you talk about centering prayer. Centering prayer sounds like everybody could probably make an assumption of what centering prayer. I'm not going to make an assumption. Actually, I would. Could you describe or demonstrate or like make sure the listener knows what the heck you mean when you say centering prayer?
Sure, yeah, and I'll be as brief as possible because it's a big question, and to be simple and naked.
Uh,
It is a meditation practice born out of the Christian contemplative tradition, popularized by Thomas Keating. And so just like mindfulness comes out of Buddhism, yoga comes out of Hinduism, centering prayer comes out of the Christian contemplative tradition. And yet you don't need to be Christian to practice it because it's not a belief-based practice, it's an intention-based. So the intention in centering prayer is a method of meditation. We sit with our eyes closed for 20 minutes. I call it a mature method of meditation. Mature being that it's self-directed. There's no guided, there's no voice, there's no headphones. You could find guided centering prayer practices, but it's really you and yourself in the nakedness of silence. Um, and so it's conventionally taught as a 20-minute self-guided meditation practice where it's not about belief, it's about consenting to God's being and becoming within us, God's presence within us, saying yes to God's presence and yes to God's action or unfolding in our lives, and letting go of all that gets in between that. So thoughts, feelings, sensations. And so it's really a practice of letting go and letting go and letting go. And what we find is that naked being beneath. So there's thoughts, feelings, doings. There's thoughts, feelings, doing. And that's where we have identity. We have identity in our beliefs and our thoughts. We have identity like, I am happy. Well, that's saying my I amness, who I am, is my happiness. I am sad. I am my sadness. No, you're not. What's the nakedness of your I am beneath the feeling? So that's where we're going to in centering prayer. And it's very much a practice. It's very much a practice that we come back to every day. But it is a formal meditation practice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful. I think I don't know. It feels like one of those phrases that is easy to just assume you know what you're talking about there. But that's helpful to just picture yourself in it and trying it and practicing it, and probably often failing at that practice and screwed it up a few times until maybe there's a moment when you meet yourself in there. In that what a moment that must be. I'm 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 curious. I want to jump to. I mean, the theme of this podcast is all about sacred moments of human connection. I'm a big believer that one of the easiest places to interact with God is in the space between me and the next person I encounter. And I often fail to practice the way that I interact with somebody in such a way that I might also meet God there because I'm distracted. It's a busy, loud world, and I'm moving in a lot of different directions. And my focus is on ego, or focuses on self-protection, or focuses on the next thing to do. So I'm just curious if there's some crossover between the way that you practice centering prayer, the way that you practice contemplative uh, meditation, contemplative life, and this idea that the space between people might be sacred. Even in normal, daily, ordinary interaction, we might find some sense of God. I'm curious, is there have you ever found God in the middle of a conversation?
In a way, I am now.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, God is very much like the air that we breathe, right? Like within us and all around us, and like the empty space between us. As I look at you through the screen, like God's being is the only thing between us is God's being. And so, yeah, that's very much alive. And I think again, we look at our contemplative practices or any spiritual practice as just training wheels to help us see that in every day. So we think our spirituality is the prayer and meditation or the going to church or the mosque or whatever it is, but really that's just the training wheels to set us up to meet God in the grocery stores, right? So yeah, God's always there. It's just that, like, do I have eyes that see? I often don't. I can very much live my life in a way that's go, go, go and do, just like everybody else. So it's an invitation to slow. It's an invitation to remind myself. Sometimes I'll use various phrases on sharpied onto my hand, and so different ways of just like daily reminders to recognize God's being here and now. And I mean, it's funny, we in the centering prayer world, Thomas Keating would say silence is the universal language of God. All others are just poor translations.
Yeah.
And so, like, the silence is the language of God. That's where we meet God in the most fundamental level. And yet these poor translations work really well. And I experienced that with my own son, who's just babbling like crazy. So, like, I encounter God there.
Yeah.
It's not English. He certainly isn't speaking English. And he's trying to speak a language and communicate. But God's so obviously present there. That's where my mind jumps to immediately.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. Uh, I love to connect people's place, like where they are, where they're from, how the world around them has informed the way that they enter the world and the way that they interact with people and the way that they understand the big questions of life. I think you live in Buffalo, New York. I've been to Buffalo. Buffalo is man, it's a blue collar town, right? A blue collar culture. It's full of hard work and grit. I'm curious. I mean, when people listen to you, they probably don't immediately think like, you know, I don't know, like let's go to the bar and have a cold beer together and talk about, with greasy fingers after work about the hardness of our day and how bad our boss is, and right, like I come from a blue collar place too, and yet I'm drawn to these big questions. I'm drawn to things that it felt like the people around me were never really talking about when I was young, but my sense is that they were. I wasn't tuned into those conversations. I'm curious how your life in Buffalo, New York informs and maybe even meshes with your contemplative spiritual life.
Yeah, it's something I haven't thought about in a long time. It's been a funny, part of my story is moving from a very localized perspective to a very global perspective, where
Yeah.
nowadays running closer than breath, and my work is an online world and connecting to online and a global community in that lens.
Yeah.
And so I've very much stepped out of the local scene where I used to work at a nonprofit. I managed a community center for 7 years, working
Yeah.
with youth and refugees, and a part of this big activist organization, very on the ground, very much like on the streets, into the buildings, very out there and active. And I've taken a huge step back from that local scene. So your question catches me by surprise, is that's been a total flip upside down
Yeah.
of my experience of like being immersed in a place where it was hard to imagine me like leaving the neighborhood I was living. I lived in it for 7 years. My office was a half mile away for 7 years, and I couldn't imagine thinking outside of that box.
Yeah.
But the global aspect of things is too enticing. So I think one of the interesting things about this town is it's very post-Christian. So it's on the list of top 10 post-Christian cities in the entire country. And so much of the Northeast is that way, like Boston. And so, there's churches everywhere, but they're empty.
Yeah.
There's churches everywhere, but they're abandoned. There's churches everywhere, but they're apartment buildings.
Hmm.
And so the church scene here is very much dead. The church that I have an office out of also has a yoga foundation within it. So the church has been, taken over in that sense, and that's fine. It is actually still a Lutheran church, but they also have a yoga organization there, which is amazing to me that those two
Yeah.
worlds would collide. And so, what's interesting about this town is that there's not a lot of religiosity here, which
Mm.
perhaps makes people a little bit more open to something other than the tradition that America was sort of like given.
Yeah. That is the empty churches on street corners or places that you as a child drove past and there was a church and now there's a condominium. That story in itself, what that represents, the the challenges that represents and that creates in real people's real lives and the way that we connect with each other in our society, right? Like plenty of people have written plenty of stuff on
Mhm.
that, but it is such like a normal reality around us that we
Mhm.
uh, thinkers think about it, but most of the time we don't notice it until we notice it, until it becomes that the people around us, we've got to build a global community
Mhm.
online, Keith, which you've done this cool closer than breath thing. And there's thousands of people that are interacting with it all over the world because their local street corners no longer have churches
Mhm.
and only have condominiums now, right? Like it's our faith life in very real practice is transforming underneath us. And all we can do is ride the wave and hope
Mhm.
that we can find each other along the way. That's what it seems like to me. You wrote something once. I don't even remember where I found this when I was digging around preparing for this conversation, somewhere on a website or in a blog or something. But you wrote something once, and I keep coming back to it. You said, I'll quote you: "If you believe religion is the single most destructive force in the world, or the single greatest transformative force in the world, you are right." And so my question to you, Keith, is considering the significant transformation of the faith world today and very likely into tomorrow. Is
Hmm.
there a future for religious institutions in the modern world? Or is what you're building and maybe what between is, are these closer to the experiments that will take hold in the future? What do you think the future of faith life looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. And my gut answer is that yes, the closer than breath, the space between is onto something here. It might not be the final evolution, and in fact, quite certainly it won't
Hmm.
be the final evolution of what faith community looks like. But it's certainly a stepping stone in that the buildings that are being shut down is evidence on the physical level of a death that needs to happen, that quite frankly needs to happen, where the church needs to die to its institutional ego. And that's probably true of other religious expressions as well, beyond the Christian church. And
Yeah.
so, one way I think about this, like, and this can be so helpful for people, the difference or distinction between exoteric religion and esoteric religion. So the exoteric, externalized religion, the holy book, the building, the belief systems, all those external things. So whether it's a Buddhist temple, a Hindu temple, the mosque, the church, that's the exoteric expression. Whether it's the Quran or the Bible, that's the exoteric, external form of faith. But then there's also the internal forms of faith, the esoteric, internal ways of experiencing the God, the ground of being directly. Prayer, meditation, whether you're Buddhist, Catholic, Hindu, whatever it is, there's all these different flavors and experiences of prayer and contemplation, and they're all very personal. It's an internal experience. And the mystics, the contemplatives, are those that are engaged in the esoteric expressions of faith. And so the external forms are going away, but what I see is the esoteric forms of faith are rising. That's the ground that's being nourished. And the reason why I believe the exoteric is going away is because we're not focusing on the internal aspects of faith. And so as those systems and the institutional ego dissolves a little bit, the more true and universal aspects of the faith, I think, will live on. I hope through spaces like Closer Than Breath and Space Between. But yeah, there needs to be a container to hold the people that are still hungry, that left those buildings, but they're still hungry for something more, something higher, perhaps, or maybe something deeper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's
Something
the
higher.
esoteric.
Yeah. What another great example of how language eludes us. We're not even sure if we're pointing higher or deeper, if we're looking up or down. And the answer is, of course, yes. The answer is, of course, that God is there, whichever direction you happen to be looking. Actually, that esoteric distinction that you just described, you've got a post somewhere deep in your social media posts, your Instagram posts, where there's an image of sort of this, uh, these exoteric expressions of faith. In fact, individual religious institutions all named, and right, the churches and the holy books all on the, and man, that's such a, I think for people who have maybe been hurt by or disappointed by faith,
Mhm.
so often have only been told that the exoteric expressions of that faith are the is the truth. And in fact have been directly told to not trust the things that they sense that are really the esoteric and more ancient
Mhm.
and somehow deeper or higher uh, realities of what we seem to be trying to connect our souls to. And that to me seems worth discussing. That sense that man, there are these exoteric expressions, these institutions that are not are not all there is. And in fact, one of the reasons I loved this conversation and I love having your voice here and other voices that we've had on the podcast is to give people permission to look in different directions than the
Mm.
directions they've been told to look in the past to find God or to find faith or to find answers or to find hope or to find connection. Look in new directions and you might be surprised. Hmm. Keith, Where should people find it? That we could talk for hours and hours, but I want to make sure that people know how to get to closer to closer than breath specifically, but to find you on social media. That your community is it's a pretty big community and it's a very active. Like there are. This isn't just like an email list. I don't think for you. This is something where people can actively engage with this community, this global community that you've created. Will you tell people more about it? Tell people how to find it.
Well, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Closerthanbreath.com is probably the most direct way and to join our newsletter there because we do have a very, very active community. And, we have a number of online events. We have 7 weekly meditation groups, ways to actually like bring people together, bring the disconnected together. In those meditation groups, you'll find evangelicals next to Buddhists, next to former pastors, next to like all different people coming together with the common search of something deeper than their own belief systems. And that's what the meditation practice is after, getting beyond that. And so Closer Than Breath is very much alive with, I don't even want to get into it, but yeah, to go to closerthanbreath.com is probably the easiest route. We do have a number of like large scale online offerings each year: Contemplative Prayer Summit, a Centering Prayer Summit. Last year, and I'm thinking, I would be curious what you would think about this, Matt, we had an interfaith Advent.
Oh, cool.
So rather than celebrating Advent in the traditional way, we had a Sufi Muslim come and talk about the meaning of Jesus and Sufism. We had Rabbi Rami Shapiro come, who's an amazing teacher to me and writer. Carmen Acevedo Butcher, who's translated The Cloud of Unknowing, and somebody else I'm forgetting, a Buddhist teacher come in and talk about Advent. So it's talking about Jesus and Advent, the Christmas season, but from an interfaith perspective. So What are the other faiths thinking about us,
Oh, wow. Man, I would love to be a part of that, like to listen in to that conversation. But also, one of the things I love about that, Keith, is that uh, you're creating a space to have an interfaith Advent uh, experience. Creates a space where you can ask new questions about an old story, right? We can ask questions about the way other faiths interact with the idea of waiting, or the idea of hope, or the idea of promises being fulfilled, right? Like that is super cool, man. Like that would be a lot of fun to dig into.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good to get the feelers out there, and that because what you just said, like to look in a different direction.
Yeah.
Be
Yeah.
willing, and that's the surprise that like, oh, guess what? Christianity doesn't have all the answers.
That's right.
And a lot of what we've been told is a lie, but guess what? Buddhism has a lot to say and a lot we can learn from. So yeah, totally to look in a different direction and hear a different perspective. And it can be scary at times, but at the same time, like death is scary, but also new life is exciting.
Yeah. Beautiful, Keith. Thanks so much for this conversation. This was perfect, man. I'm glad to get to connect with you. I read your social media content daily. I am subscribed to your newsletter and I open that consistently. What I love is your pithiness. You are better at writing in short, compact ways that offer meaning than I am. I'm good at adding extra words where they are not needed. And you've got this way about the way that you communicate and the way that you express stuff on social media that is so quick and meaty. It is like concentrated, I guess is the right word. And I just wanted to give you that compliment because I genuinely appreciate your content consistently, both in my email inbox and online. So thanks, man.
Thank you, Matt. And I think that's an attempt at the expression of getting to the essence of things, not getting lost in the thinking, feeling, doing what's the absolute universal. So I take that as a compliment. Thank you.
Hey, thanks to all you betweeners out there for listening to this episode of the Between Podcast. Make sure you visit between.church on the internet to sign up for our mailing list. That's probably the most important thing, our email list. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. You can check out our 5-minute sermons, 5-ish minute sermons that we post every week. Follow us on social media. We got daily prayers. We got all sorts of other content. And join our community fully. We invite everyone. You are welcome here, no matter who you are or where you're from, no matter what you believe or even if you believe, no matter who you love or how you love, no matter what anybody else has ever told you about you. You are welcome and loved and celebrated here at Between. You know, my favorite church is the space between people. Now go with God's love and create the church between.